a great pleasure for African Ascent to host on this beautiful spring day one of the most globally prominent experts on the phenomena of aging, an existential condition that we human beings are fated to go through. My guest, Margaret Gullett, who is married to an equally famous professor of English who has taught for a number of years at Simmons College, David Gullett, shares an interest in culture and relentless criticisms of it with her husband. Together, I'm proud to say, African Ascent has been graced, not for the first time, but for the second time, to bring luminaries directly to your living rooms. The interview that I will have with Margaret Gullett, who has been a prominent cultural critique since 1989, it just introduces a full-fledged introduction and an interview that will take place about a month from now. So for the next half hour or so, I'm going to have a feast of the intellectual imagination as she discourses quite fluently, as you would see, on the phenomena of aging. Welcome to African Ascent.
Well, thank you, Teodros. It's so nice to be here.
What a pleasure. And right in front of me, by the way, are two really charming, handsome books. A credit goes both to the author, who chose the printing, and to the publishers who correspondingly produced appropriate colors for them. One is called Aged by Culture, remarkable title, and the second one is called Age-Wise. May I have the pleasure of sharing this with my precious audience. Here are the books. I hope they are sufficiently prominent for them, for you to see them, so that you can go to the bookstore this very afternoon and buy them.
I see that the size of the type of this one is right for television, and the other is
and the other
small.
one is too small. Well, what readers of Margaret Gullett say about her, and have done quite a bit of extensive reading on experts' views of the books, is that when you ask her a single question, she's so fluent, she knows the subject so well that you don't even have to ask a second question. She herself divides that one question into several questions and produces a flawless interview. This is what I heard. So perhaps we should begin with this. Correct me if I'm wrong. As a student of philosophy, I'm accustomed to read philosophical works. So there is this statement in Plato's Republic, I think in the very beginning, as a matter of fact, in Book 1, in which a reference is made to aging by one of the interlocutors, whose name is Kiros. And in the context of the discussion with Kiros, Plato renuminates and he asks the famous Greek poet Sophocles if he is still good, if he is still doing it at this particular age. And Sophocles answers, he says, no, not anymore. I have been freed from this savage beast, he says. I wonder, yes. I wonder if we can begin with that as a segue to discuss what people think aging is about. That at a certain age, there are certain things that belong to us that are not supposed to work appropriately.
There is a chapter in Age-Wise called Improving Sexuality Across the Life Course, and it's about women. It's part of the whole second section of the book, which is entirely about women, or almost entirely about women, although I do talk a bit about men in terms of what goes wrong in women's sexual lives as they get older, because most of the chapter is about what goes right. And as I do in many chapters, I'm thinking about the whole life course. I'm not thinking about cutting off one specific age and saying, we are going to focus on everything over 65, or everything over 80, or everything over 45. I'm very keen. I have named the field that I work in age studies. And the reason for doing this is because I'm interested in the whole life course and the way one piece of life works with another piece of life, and how the media and the culture in general treat the different ages in relationship to one another, and also pit them against one another, so that young people are pitted against old people, and youth sex is pitted against what you might call old sex. And if you do that in the typical way, you say, we say, Socrates was actually rather proud, I think, of having overcome that drive. And of course, there's a whole tradition of people who, in the West as well as in the East, of feeling that sexuality is actually unbecoming to older people. What I want to say about that is that it probably never was true that people did not have sex in later life, and indeed in quite late life. And there's a wonderful story that I'm about to publish, which is about my mother. My mother fell in love when she was in her late 70s, and she had been married to my father, and he died. And she had been married to another man, and they divorced. And then in her late 70s, she fell in love, and it was a real affair. And it lasted for many years, and it was mutual, and it was a romance. And she let me know in the delicate way that a mother can let a child know this, an adult child, of course, that it was the best sex of her life. Now, we don't need my mother to tell us that this is possible, but it is possible. And so this chapter about sexuality begins by talking about youth sex and how difficult youth sex is for young women. It starts often earlier than a girl wants it to start. And this is all based on studies. I mean, I didn't do my own research about this. I read a great deal in the sexuality literature, and the sexuality literature does focus usually on one age group, if it focuses on an age group, and my chapter, as I'm about to say, does not. And so we're talking about violence in early sexuality for young women. We're talking about unpreparedness, that is, psychological unpreparedness, but also biological unreadiness and emotional unreadiness. So I go through the list of the fears, the unpleasantness. Unpleasantness is a word that actually recurred a lot in these stories about youthful sexuality. I mean, it's not universal, but it is very prevalent. And there are women who are abused by their boyfriends, and they don't know that this is abuse. They think that this is normal relations between girls and boys. I mean, there's been a lot of good writing about this recently, but it's never put in connection with later life sexuality. And I think it ought to be, because one of the things that if you interview women in midlife and later life, what you find out is that it gets better. It gets better. And of course it gets better. If it's so bad to begin with, I mean, and there are also troubles early in a marriage with having children interferes with a free sex life, and there are many men become batterers if they haven't been earlier. Sometimes marriage seems to provoke battering. Sometimes having the first child is what provokes battering. At any rate, you look at women, you get interviews with women in their middle years of life, and they are basically saying, it got better. And I'll tell you why. And they want to tell you how it came about.
Yes.
Well, sometimes they made the guy change, and sometimes they walked. They just walked. They got out of the marriage, they got out of the battering, they found a second husband or a second lover, sometimes it's another woman. I mean, people, their sexuality changes in the course, it can change in the course of adulthood. But they talk about other things. They talk about learning what their sexuality is. That is to say, what do they like in bed? What do they not like in bed? How do you convey that? Can you learn how to talk about it better than you did when you were 15? I mean, it's impossible to think that a 15-year-old would be able to say what she wants to have happen, or when she wants it to happen, or if she doesn't want it to happen. And then they say other things about the learning, the sexual learning. This is emotional, practical, physiological. I mean, sexuality is it's a big part of life, but it also has these other aspects. It isn't just how good you are, or how good he is, or how good she is. It's about all these different kinds of learning that go on. And so I think you can actually make a case that sexuality can get better across much of the life course. Now, what you want to do is define sexuality, again, more broadly. I mean, I think celibacy should be a part of the sexuality discourse. I mean, I know young people who take, for example, somebody in my book told me she wanted to take a celibate year. She just was going to get out of the dating game and just, and not go to bars, heaven forbid, and not read, the ads in the Women's Review of Books, not in the Women's Review, the New York Review of Books is the one that has the famous advertising about partnering with people that you don't know yet. So she was just going out of it for a year. And I thought, this is brilliant. This is brilliant. Now, of course, you do get unwanted celibacy. You do get widowhood. You do get divorce. You get a lot of, and then you get a few things that are connected to aging. One of these is that men die younger than women. Now, this is highly socially organized. There is some biology to it. They say baby boys are weaker than baby girls in embryo, at birth, in the first 5 years, and so on. But most of this early death of men is social. It has to do with homicide, drugs, car accidents, motorcycle accidents, recklessness in young men that seems to go on a lot longer. That is, part of it is socially approved, and part of it, of course, is highly disapproved of, but still happens. And then men have other bad habits, smoking, drinking too much, obesity. In other words, they die younger than women. So a lot of women are left without possible partners unless they're gay, which is, of course, always a possibility later on in life. And there's a famous philosopher named Sandra Lee Barkey who wrote Foucault and Feminism, who argues that this would be a good thing for older women to think about when the men have basically disappeared from their social circles and their networks and certainly their work lives. But I'm afraid I'm going on too long, Teodros, and that I am going to prove you right about the fact that I can answer a question and take up a whole half hour. So perhaps we should be moving along in the directions you want to go in.
It's quite a pleasure. And now, having listened to you and having read your work as carefully as I can, I have fallen in love with the idea of aging.
Oh.
You make the idea of aging, very much philosophically speaking, like the idea of death, attractive.
Well,
I'm not afraid of aging. Now that I have listened to you, now that I have read your works, I look forward to aging, and in that I'm not going to let culture age me.
Well,
or ideology age me, or biology determine my faith.
Yes. Well, you have read me very carefully, Teodros, and I'm very pleased that you feel that way. I mean, I don't mean, it's not really a book about aging. I mean, I'm glad that you took that. It's a book about ageism and middle ageism. And maybe if we have another time to talk, I'll talk about middle ageism more, because I think ageism is backing down the life course. Now, of course, some people in your audience won't even know what ageism is. It's bias against people on account of their age. And bias extends all the way from, well, it's a definitional issue. And some people say they've been treated in an ageist manner if somebody stands up on a bus and offers them their seat. Well, I don't deal with that in my book. I mean, I think if somebody offers you their seat on a bus, you should just say thank you and sit down. But I'm interested in the lethal forms of ageism. And those start with ageism in the workforce, which is extremely prevalent right now. I mean, it has been getting worse. It started decades ago with what was called downsizing and or outsourcing, or there were many ways in which the workplace was getting rid of midlife workers, not to mention old workers. And it's become a tremendous problem in the United States, and it's really underestimated, I think, as a problem. I mean, I saw Paul Krugman talking about, I read Krugman, who was he teaches at Princeton, he's a columnist in the New York Times, and he had a piece about unemployment, which is still very serious in the United States. The recession is not over. I mean, I know technically economists say it's over, but in terms of unemployment, it is not over at all. And although he talked about the people who have been long unemployed, he did not talk about midlife people as a separate category from younger people. In other words, I think you need to make a distinction when you're talking about underemployment and unemployment and long-term unemployment. You need to make a distinction between people under 40 or under 45 and people over 40 and over 45, because the difference is just tremendous. And I see I am now talking about what I call middle ageism, as opposed to talking about ageism.
So what you're doing is, correct me if I'm wrong, at this stage of your career, you're interested in the political economy of aging.
Absolutely.
And not in the metaphysics of it. Because these are two separate tracts.
Well,
because we're born to age. Correct?
Yes, of course we are, and we will die. And reading my book will not help you.
Well, it did help me.
Well, I mean about the dying piece.
Yes, the metaphysical piece. Yeah.
But I think I see unemployment in a way that has psychological aspects and spiritual aspects.
That's what I thought you were
maybe
doing.
What you would call metaphysical aspects.
Yes.
I mean, what we see is that it's devastating to start off just for the individual.
Correct.
And it's devastating for the family. If you are in your mid-40s or your mid-50s, you probably have nearly adult children or teenagers. They need you to be earning a midlife salary.
Correct.
And if you're not, there is a risk that they, of course, will lose out, that they won't be able to go to college, or that they won't be able to get your help buying their first house, or whatever the life stage that they happen to be in which people would like to be able to look to their parents for a little help. So, of course, disappointing your children is one of the saddest things that can happen in an adult's life. So there's that psychological part. It can definitely affect your sex life. To be unemployed for, even for 3 months, even for a month, can be devastating to you psychologically. And that is bound to have effects on all aspects of family life. Well, we also know that suicide rates rise when there's long and deep unemployment. I mean, people can become so depressed, and depressed in ways that really have no answer. I mean, an antidepressant drug is not what you want when you have been unemployed for 2 years. You want a job. So I stay interested in this subject, and I have written about this subject on Al Jazeera, as a matter of fact, recently, because I was updating some of my data, and I turned to Andrew Sum, who is a professor of economics at Northeastern, and I asked him sort of what the unemployment statistics look like in terms of the healing from the recession. Well, basically, we're not healing from the recession. He said for every person out there looking, we would need 6 jobs in order to get all the unemployed off the unemployment rolls.
What I'm going to do is, as I promised my audience, I'm going to invite you back so that we can concentrate on age-wise along this trajectory that you have for it. For now, we have about a minute left. Is there anything that you'd like to say about how culture ages us in one line or two?
Well, I think there's sort of a motto that has come out of the book that I now use a great deal, and it goes, fear ageism, not aging. And I think for some people this will just seem preposterous. I mean, they know, and I know, and you know, that debility can come with old age. It can come earlier than old age. We know that cognitive impairment can come with old age, or earlier even than old age. I mean, we know that many things happen in terms of brain and body. What we need to do as a culture is change our attitude towards these issues and help our vulnerable populations more. Ageism is a crisis in the United States, and it should be recognized as a crisis on a par with, I would say, global warming. I mean, many of us will survive global warming, but ageism will destroy our old age.
Remarkable. As I said, Professor Gillette will come back in about a month or so, and we're going to have a full-fledged interview on one specific work of hers, a fascinating one called Age-Wise. African Ascent is grateful to have had you for the past 30 minutes, although the intention was to talk to you for about 1 hour. Thanks for coming.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
I heard some things. My friends have talked.
School is different. My parents are different.
Afraid?
Afraid.
Afraid.
I don't want to be afraid.
Afraid to go to school?
Afraid to play outside.
Afraid to grow up.
I didn't grow up afraid, and I don't want him to either.
We must speak out. The right to bear arms or your child's safety. Which one is more important to you? The choice is yours.
Looking for these? You drive buzzed. It could be one very expensive ride.
First, you gotta make bail. Then pay me to get your car back.
Your insurance premiums will go through the roof.
And my legal fees just keep adding up. All told, it could end up costing you $10,000.
Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzz driving, because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Oh, those boys are much too much. Those boys are much too much. We got the spirit. We're hot. We can't be stopped. We got the spirit. We're hot. We can't be stopped. We're gonna beat them and bust them.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life.
Let's get a little bit rowdy. R-O-W-D-Y.
Take time to be a dad today. Call or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
Here we go. We're gonna make some juice. Looks good. You ready to try it?
Challenge your kids to be active and eat healthy.
It's okay.
Okay. She took another sip. You saw it?
Search We Can for ideas on how to get healthy together.
African Ascent is very proud to bring Ashmita Kashimbash for the second time to the floors of our cutting-edge studio, BNN itself. She's not a guest to African Ascent anymore because she's been here before, and I had promised her that she was going to return and have a continued conversation on these highly important themes that she's working on. Tonight, we have agreed that we're going to speak as carefully as we can on two central ideas, central concepts in human lives, namely human needs, human capabilities, and how different cultures, Western and non-Western, struggle with these perennial themes of our time. My guest is a professor of English literature, I believe, at MIT. She's a prolific author. She has already written, published 2 books, and there is a forthcoming book that she doesn't want me to broach until after the book is published, in which time I'll invite her and concentrate on that book and that book only. I think she was about to correct me about her field of study, visiting scholar.
Not the professor.
Okay.
I am a English professor of English literature, but not at MIT, but I'm a visiting scholar. I just finished my book.
You're a visiting scholar?
At MIT.
At MIT.
Yes.
Okay. So thanks for coming to African Ascent. You're now a regular contributor, and we're very proud to have you. So what I thought we should do in general terms is talk about the complementarities between the East and the West with respect to this question of how it is that we human beings, articulate our needs, whatever they may be, and then supplant them with our capabilities, and then develop theories and frames of orientation so as to satisfy these human needs given our culturally nuanced understandings of human capabilities. It's a mouthful, but I'm sure you're going to break it down into its respective parts and
Sure.
guide me through it.
Sure. What I liked most about your question or comment, both, is that the way you framed East and West together. And so I would just directly launch into the discussion of my forthcoming book, which I named Negotiating Capability and Diaspora. Subtitle is A Philosophical Politics. So you could see from the subtitle that there's a trick there where I'm trying to bring the East close to the West or taking West close to the East. And in this specific manuscript, I brought one eminent American philosopher, John Rawls, and I also brought in the Indian philosopher, Amartya Sen. And as you could see, John Rawls, his theory of justice created such a repercussion not only in the Western world but in the Eastern world as well. As I can bring in this reference, your book on, it's called, I think, Moral Philosophy and Development, and the condition in the food crisis in Africa. And the way you brought in John Rawls to discuss and develop what you called in the I think in chapter 1 and 2, you have called it counter-hegemonic discourse. And then you interpret counter-hegemonic discourse as consciousness or raising of consciousness. Then you brought in Hegel, Marx, and finally Rawls. He's in the beginning, and then very nicely he's integrated into your work when you are working on his theory of first principle. I read it very carefully, and second principle, and you said how that could be used to ameliorate the situation in Africa, and how the first principle can help alleviate poverty among themselves, and the second principle can think of helping others. And you also supported his theory of transcendental theory of institution that, and I think if I remember correctly, on page 148, you talk about organizing African unity. So I think as I read this book, it created so much excitement in my mental framework, knowing that I was not aware until I read this book that that Rawls's theory could be used to analyze African food crisis. And it is not just a food crisis on which you are shedding light. You are also talking about periodically about consciousness raising and so on and so forth. So, so now what I used, so in this reference I want to talk about what I'm doing in my forthcoming book, which is still a manuscript. I don't call it book until it's out. It is in press. I dialogue with I create a discourse and through dialoguing between Amartya Sen, John Rawls, and the Indian philosopher Sri Aurobindo. So I think as all of you know, I think you know for sure that Sen's 2009 publication of the book, The Idea of Justice, is sort of like a direct dialogue with Rawls's theory of justice. And here specifically he developed his theory in terms of capability from Rawls's theory of primary goods. So his reservation against Rawls's theory is that he's supporting Rawls, but at the same time he's differing from him or he's deconstructing Rawls, because like deconstructing and reconstructing, because he thinks that he has this reservation against transcendentalism or transcendental institution, because he thinks that if we create the transcendental institution, then we are sort of putting a straitjacket and we are overlooking the underdogs and the immigrant communities, or the diversity, diverse population, diverse culture, and all these things that we have on globe. And I was also remembering the term used by Martha Nussbaum, the heterogeneity, the non-commensurability. You cannot put them all together under that rubric of or category of transcendental institution, which Rawls wanted to do. And but still, I'm enamored of Rawls. I was in a dilemma as I was developing my theory, because I myself got enamored of Rawls's theory of first original position and the second original position and the veil of ignorance. And because I felt that through first original position is very important, because I linked it to my theory of ego transcendence, because as I proposed in my first book, Jouissance Ananda, also in this one, Humanitarian Identity and the Political Sublime. So I felt that in the theory of first original position, Rawls is talking about, when he's saying that we have to conform in the name of political justice, I felt that he's invoking that notion of ego transcendence, that close your eyes, you conform, because you are conforming to the higher norm, which is political justice. And then he talks about the second original position, and that first original position is for the domestic case and second original position is for the globe. So he's not ignoring the world, but maybe you could say he's more idealistic or more voyeuristic than Sen. Maybe Sen is more pragmatic. And so I can go on, but I feel like I'm talking only. Okay,
well,
so let me just finish. Then Shen, I felt that this is the way I feel that as I develop the manuscript, that they intersect with each other, because Shen's theory of capability, although it grew as a critique or in dialogue with Rawls's critique of Rawls's theory of primary goods, first and second original positions, and the veil of ignorance, it seems it also has nuances of spirituality, if I may say, which he will not acknowledge, but it is still there, because in the theory of capability, when he is explaining it and developing it, he many times, not just once, he mentioned Buddhism and the Buddhist text Sutta Nipata. So I read Sutta Nipata thoroughly just to understand where is he coming from, what is the source. And I felt that he is invoking that inner spiritual strength. Capability is not the capability the way Martha Nussbaum interpreted it, like closing it in like in 10 entitlements. No, I agree with Martha Nussbaum. I'll talk about it later, but I feel that Shen's approach to capability is also very philosophical and, as he mentions, grounded in Buddhism, very much grounded in Indian spirituality.
But correct me if I'm wrong. But for some odd reason, Rawls, whom I knew when he was alive, have actually sat in some of his seminars. I also had the good pleasure of sharing my book with him after it was published. I was quite young at the time. I was, I think, in my late 30s. But for some reason, Rawls does not mention ego transcendence, nor does the term spirituality even appear in the indexes, whereas your contribution to this discourse, embedded in your Indianity, after all, your ancestors are some of the greatest thinkers, gifts to humankind, Sri Bondo among them, cannot think of ameliorating and changing the human condition until after we nakedly confront our ego and learn how to subdue it. So that given the possibility of subduing our self-centered ego, then the possibility of encountering others becomes a spiritual challenge. Whereas the Rawlsian project, which is rule-oriented, which is law-oriented, and framed by a Kantian moral structure, does not think that there is A, any ego there, and B, that this ego has to be transcended. At best, the ego will not be transcended, but it will be controlled by rules, by public policy.
Wonderful, wonderful question. I think you could say I did not want to expose the, what I call originality of my thought, since the book is still not out, but this is one of the original contribution of this manuscript, the way I interpreted John Rawls's theory of the veil of ignorance. And I refer to Isha Upanishad, and I'll quote this sloka for you. Hiranmayana patrena shuttasya pihitam mukham tattam apabrinu shutta dharmaya drishtate. That the truth is covered with a golden lead, and O sun god, open the lead so that we can see the face of truth. So golden lead here stands for the hankering for material desire, all those stuff. So so when I saw the way he interpreted first original position, and also in the Law of the Peoples, I love that book more than his book Theory of Justice, because in Law of the Peoples, toward the end, throughout the book and specifically toward the end, he's saying that that we may have, he calls it comprehensive doctrines, that we may have comprehensive doctrines which he calls could be religious or non-religious affiliations, but you have to sort of control them to conform to the higher norm of political justice.
To Brahman.
Yes.
In
Brahma,
Indian.
yes.
Atman has to be controlled by Brahman.
Yes. So what you say, the control by, that's my reservation. Controlling it by public policy, it's not going to happen. The change has to come within. And in this context, although likewise Shen doesn't want to be labeled as a spiritualist, but in his theory of capability, I got that nuance as well. He doesn't like legalization, what Nujbam is talking about, legalization of human rights. He says it has to come from within your soul. And in a recent lecture I attended at Tufts University Fletcher School, I heard him speaking, and he said the same thing, that Martha Nussbaum tries to give only a few entitlements in terms of capabilities, but I want to keep it open because capabilities will change, may change. You know, we may have more than 10, maybe 16, 20. So it is not possible to control by public policy. It has to come from within. And going back to what you asked me before, John Rawls, I think they have this reservation toward metaphysics because, again, that is Eastern and this is Western.
Correct.
But he may have thought, I mean, I don't know, unconsciously, or he has that nuance of spirituality.
You're quite right, because when he challenges us to remove the veil, what he's essentially asking us to do is to make determined decisions and do not let what the existentialists called the factical dimension of our existence, our weight, our height, our skin color, our gender, our sex, determine the choices that we make. When we put ourselves behind the veil, all these externals become unnecessary.
Evaporate,
which in Indian discourse, correct me if I'm wrong, is equivalent to the argument that you're making or to the argument that one could make. Atman, which is the factical dimension of our existence, can be purified only when it submits to Brahman, the transcendental condition. Would I be right?
Yes, through ego
in that sense, that is ego transcendence.
And so that's where Sri Aurobindo comes in, because I bring in his philosophy of supramental consciousness that talks about that 7 layers, that you can go up from mind, higher mind, illumined mind, supermind, above mind. And but at the same time, you don't stay there at that supermind plane of consciousness, because Sri Aurobindo criticizes Buddha, because Buddha talks about nirvana. So Sri Aurobindo is proposing that you have to bring that supramental light, purified, which I call in my previous book, political sublime. You have to bring that sublime to this level, to the pragmatic level of consciousness, so that we don't have to live life to achieve that ego transcendence.
Okay.
We can do it here.
And one final question, if I could phrase this as carefully as I can, it's this. It appears that in your discourse, and also in Sri Aurobindo, that rationality, which the Rawlsians think, if the power through which we can control the excesses of the ego, is not sufficiently complete to enable us to transcend the excesses of the ego. And in this sense, you are challenging the Rawlsians, who think that global world conditions could be overcome if we were all to become reasonable and rational.
But as quoting Sri Aurobindo, as he proposed in his Ideal of Human Unity in that book, as you can see from the title of the book, he calls it supra-rational ultimate of life, because the rationality is good, and Sri Aurobindo also admires the Western theory of enlightenment in terms of fraternity, brotherhood, and those the three principles of
Yes.
French Revolution: liberty, fraternity, equality, liberty, and fraternity. But he says at the same time, rationality, just the reliance on reason, can make you too egoistic, because you think that ego is everything, and there is nothing beyond the ego, and that makes you very selfish, self-centered.
Correct. And this is probably then, it's this awareness that led the great German philosopher Schopenhauer to be exuberant, he says, when he read the Upanishads. He discovered something that he did not know until then: the limitations of rationality, the limitations of morality. Because Schopenhauer had accused Kant of remaining tied to his ego in the name and claim that he's transcending it with reason.
In this book, I do a critique of Kant, humanitarian identity and the political sublime. And as you can see, the term sublime, I take it from Kant, then I reread the term, saying that in Kant's theory of the sublime, there is a divorce between beautiful and the sublime. They cannot, like senses and spirituality, they have to be divorced from each other. He cannot bring the two together. But according to Indian philosophy, this could be brought in together.
How?
According to Upanishad.
Let's elaborate on that.
I will go back to Sri Aurobindo again. And as I was mentioning a little while ago about going up from mind through higher mind, above mind, illumined mind, and then super mind. So you can go up this way. So the sublime is here, which according to Sri Aurobindo we can call supermind. But Sri Aurobindo talks about the process. He also enunciated as a process of ascent and descent. So you go up, that's the process of ascent. But you just don't stay there. You need to bring it down to this plane of
those are the pragmatics of the sublime, as you put it.
It is called descent. So this is the way you can bridge the connection between the sublime and the senses, the beautiful, that Kant calls.
That's how you reconcile the tension between the sensuous and the cognitive. And in the case of Sri Aurobindo, the supra-cognitive, as a matter of fact.
And when I say political sublime, it means bringing that sublimity to the material plane. So I use political in my own way, meaning the practicing it in everyday life.
Incredible. Now, suppose that we're walking down the street, and very much like the experience of the Buddha, who was much profounder than most of us, we encounter these homeless persons who await our attention. And yet, we don't really attend to them. We just walk by them. What do you think is something that I could use from Indian philosophy to help me to realize my obligations to attend to the condition of these homeless persons?
I will unite the theory of John Rawls with Shen and Sri Aurobindo's theory, meaning, as you mentioned in your book, Organizing African Unity, I have to use not what I can do in terms of spirit only, but also what I can do in terms of matter, meaning I have to do some consciousness raising so people are aware of this condition, and at the same time, I have to do something to make it materialize, to make it true, that it really happens, doesn't stay abstract at the level of theory. So in other words, bringing the theory of capability with John Rawls's theory of political justice and veil of ignorance, first position, second position, and bringing them together, idealization and materialization, they have to go hand in hand. Again, I say, refer to Sri Aurobindo because that's his mantra he's uttering, and that's the mantra I'm also uttering. And so once you can feel, and another thing we could do, because go back to nature. You also mentioned in your book, nature, and I felt that Tagore's line, the Rabindranath Tagore, our Nobel laureate poet, "Dao fire he aranyo lao she nagor," take away the city, please give me back my woods, my forests, my village. As you said, your father was a peasant and you wanted to go back to the agrarian culture. You very much, I felt that you're invoking that as well in your book. So nature is very important. And in this context, I want to mention my father, who is a poet, a statistician and a poet, who wrote his book when I was very little. He has earlier books was called Brikkho, Brikkho, Brikkho Amar Praner Basana, means that, and the title of the book is Kemon Dekheche Brikkho, meaning how the tree calls. And Brikkho, Brikkho, Brikkho Amar Praner Basana, tree is the desire of my life. So less urbanization, going back to nature and feel the center of our consciousness. So you can help this homeless person, because if you just go and give him some food or shelter, it's not going to alleviate the problem. Maybe just one single person, but it may also interfere with the consciousness, because we have to put him into the proper frame of consciousness. And again, controlling by public policy may work to a certain extent, but not to the full extent. And that's why I'm talking about bringing both John Rawls Shen and Sri Aurobindo together. We need to change some public policies, as Rawls had suggested, having those transcendental institutions. I'm not denying it or discarding it altogether, but at the same time, individual cases of capability, as Shen proposed, and qualified by Sri Aurobindo's theory of supramental consciousness.
Incredible. This has been your host, Teodros Kiros, for African Ascent. African Ascent has had this enormous pleasure to, for the first time, interview two guests simultaneously, two of whom have hardly begun interviewing with us, but both of whom have promised to come back and continue this remarkable dialogue, remarkable conversation of use to each and every one of my curious audience out there.